organized, and corporations like Standard Chartered and BlackRock, they charge higher rates of interest to the global south than they do to rich countries. So, for example, the countries in Africa are paying 4 times more in rates of interest than what are being charged to the USA. They're paying 8 times more than what is being charged to Germany. And so they're profiting well and good from the high interest rates that they're charging from the global south. And actually, and so they're being well remunerated for what they say is the risk of lending to the global south. And so when things go wrong, things like pandemic, things like wars, when things go wrong and countries can no longer pay up, then actually they should take the hit and they should come to the table and cancel the debt. Zambia is in a debt crisis, and it's asked its lenders to cancel the debt, but creditors like BlackRock are not playing ball. They're not coming to the table to negotiate the debt, and if they manage to press Zambia for full repayment, then they are going to profit by 110%. Pakistan last year, they suffered devastating flooding created by the climate crisis, which affected 33 million people. If the speculators get what they want, they are going to profit 200% from Pakistan. The World Bank and IMF are meeting this week in Morocco, in Marrakech. Do you know what the solutions are on the table? The solutions that they're putting forward are going to be more loans, more austerity, and more harmful conditions attached to these loans. And history tells us that IMF austerity hurts ordinary people, especially women, girls, and other marginalized communities the most. And the IMF and World Bank have long been used as weapons of colonialism to push extraction and control over the global south. Debts often have to be borrowed in foreign currencies, often in the US dollar. And so global south countries are forced to have to see their resources leave their country, but also the pressure of having to earn foreign currency to pay back these debts. And so this leaves them open to multinational corporations that want to come and exploit their resources. But also more dangerously, the IMF are also forcing countries to expand fossil fuel exploitation in order to earn the currency to pay back these loans. And so debt is making the climate crisis a whole lot worse. Global South countries are spending 5 times more on debt repayments than they can on fighting the climate emergency. And when disasters hit, when floods and hurricanes come their way, then they have to borrow even more money to pay for rebuilding and reconstruction. In other words, the countries that have the least responsibility for the climate crisis are paying for it through even more indebtedness. So the real question that we are asking here today is who owes who? Rich countries owe the global south at least 65 times in climate debt to the global south than the global south annual debt repayments. So that's why we are here today to demand debt cancellation for all countries that need it, from all of their lenders, and free of all economic conditions. And today we are here to stand in solidarity with our friends and our partners and brothers and sisters across the world, across the global south, that are organising actions, protests and events outside Marrakech, the IMF meetings in Marrakech, in Morocco, outside the IMF offices across the world, to say, cancel the debt for climate justice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Heidi. What do we want?
Cancel the debt!
What do we want?
Cancel the debt!
So Heidi made some really amazing points there. I want to also draw the fact out that we are part of a long struggle. 36 years ago this Sunday, Thomas Sankara was assassinated. one of the major things he demanded, the president of Burkina Faso, was the cancellation of debt to Burkina Faso and many other African countries. We are part of a resistance that has a long pedigree, and that's because the whole debt relationship that exists today is strange. The way in which we support each other could be an engine of togetherness. Instead, we use debt as an engine of separateness. Behind it all is the idea that someone who needs help somehow should owe the person who has power to help them. So someone who is already experiencing pain and suffering and inequality has to demand help from someone who has the power to give it to them. And then the person with the power asks not only for everything back, but interest, but more power, but more. This greed is what underpins the modern debt relationship. And it is completely unnecessary. It is completely invented. But it has been solidified in law and rocks and buildings and structures and greedy people. And these buildings around us, and this is where it's been solidified, and these buildings can be turned to help and turned to again become an engine of togetherness that brings us together. And we need this. We need this if we're going to do anything about climate change, because debt also, this inequality is the ghost in the machine. It's the reason why the mines are in the global south and all the wealth is in the global north. Until we do something about that, it's not going to change. The climate and ecological catastrophe is going to keep getting worse. So cancelling the debt is an existential issue, not just for the global south, where they're feeling it directly, but for the global north, for all of humanity. This is one A3 sheet of paper. The size of this represents 1/65th of the size of this banner, this white banner up here. Cancel global south debt, it says. This represents $211 billion, this piece of paper. $211 billion is what the global south pays back to the global north annually. Pays back. $211 billion. This is 65 times larger, this banner. This banner represents $7.9 trillion. This is how much, conservatively, the global north owes the global south in climate debt. In a climate and ecological catastrophe that has vastly been caused by the consumption habits of the global north. So we're asking to cancel the debt. So I'm going to ask you to yell again, cancel the debt. And I'm going to rip this up, this 211 billion, this absurd knee on the neck of the global south that is being extracted in buildings like this one here. So when you're ready, shout, cancel the debt! Cancel the debt! Cancel the debt! Cancel the debt!
Cancel the debt! Cancel the debt! Cancel the debt! Cancel the debt!
I'm going to invite our next speaker, Tyrone Scott from War on Want. Please give a big hand to Tyrone.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you everyone who's come out here today in such an important demonstration to cancel the unjust, illegitimate global South debt. Because we face multiple crises, unprecedented rising temperatures, a global crisis of inequality, and more recently, a global cost of living crisis, all of which are ravaging the lives and lands of the most poorest and marginalized communities. These past few years have seen climate breakdown wreak havoc across the globe. From record heat waves and fires spreading across Europe and the rest of the world, to flooding displacing 33 million people and submerging a third of Pakistan, to the 55 million people pushed into poverty and climate-induced famine by the droughts in the Horn of Africa. The effects of climate crisis are hitting us all, but it's those least responsible for the crisis who are paying the heaviest price. The need for genuine justice is ever more pressing. Centuries of colonialism and exploitation have seen global north countries become rich by extracting massive amounts of wealth from countries in the global south. It is this very same model of exploitation that has fueled the climate crisis. Rich, industrialized global north countries have contributed an estimated 92% of excess historical carbon emissions and 37% of current emissions, despite being home to just 15% of the global population. Poorer global south countries have contributed very little to global carbon emissions, yet bear the brunt of extreme climate breakdown, such as the devastating floods in Pakistan. The IPCC now estimates that 3.6 billion people are vulnerable to the worst impacts of the climate crisis. This is the inevitable result of a bit of business as usual, a rigged global economy designed to maximize profit for a few at the expense of the lives and livelihoods of the majority of people in the world. Unequal global tax and trade rules and the unfettered power of corporations leave global south countries dependent on international loans and export-led trading models based on the exploitation of cheap labor at home to pay back unjust colonial debts. The system has left half the world locked in poverty, denied basic rights such as access to energy, food, healthcare, and access to a living wage. Many countries in the global south remain locked into debt, servicing vast international loans while facing cost of living crisis and the ongoing after effects of the pandemic and climate breakdown on lives and livelihoods. And this is why we are calling to cancel all illegitimate global south debt, which since 1980 has resulted in close to $4.6 trillion in payments from the global south to the global north. Debt cancellation will ensure global south countries can use their resources to support their own citizens by investing in public services such as healthcare. The debt crisis and wealth extraction from the global south has led to 134 countries forced into austerity plans. That's 6.7 billion people. Today, there are 64 countries in the world which spend more on debt repayments than they can on their healthcare systems, let alone on adapting to the climate crisis. All while trillions continue to flow from the global south to banks and corporations in the global north. And this doesn't even get into the debt that's owed from ourselves to countries in the global south. The UK's climate debt, the UK's alone climate debt, is estimated to be in excess of £1 trillion, calculated from the UK share of all times of carbon emissions and quantifying both the benefit a country has reaped and the damage it has sown. The figure may seem enormous, yet £1.7 trillion is extracted from global south to the global north by corporations, banks, and richer global north countries every single year. Paying off climate debt means the UK prioritising doing its fair share of climate action, stopping further harm, funding repairs to reverse the harm already done, and compensating for the damage that cannot be repaired. Repaying this debt is a matter of justice. The UK must take responsibility for its present and historical role in fueling the climate crisis. It is time for the UK and other rich, industrialised global north countries to take responsibility for fueling the climate crisis, having produced the majority of all carbon emissions, not just by cancelling illegitimate colonial debt, but by paying reparations to countries in the global south. The call for climate reparations, for climate finance, is about making those who did the most to cause this climate crisis take responsibility for their impacts. Countries in the global south, as we've said, have contributed their least to this climate crisis, yet are experiencing the worst impacts of climate breakdown, from economic damages to destruction and loss of people's lands, lives, and culture. But cancelling global south debt is not climate reparations or climate finance. This colonial global south debt is unjust, and debt cancellation should never be paid as a form of climate finance. It should come on top of it. It is time for us to shed our colonial past. It is time for us to pay for the damage we have caused and free global south countries from the shackles of unfair, unjust, and inhumane colonial debt repayments. Debt is the key factor in how this rigged system is enabling the rich to maintain a stranglehold on the poorest and run rampant on the natural world. For 500 years, the capitalist logic of exploitation of people and limitless extraction of resources has fueled slavery, colonialism, and imperialism, creating a global economic system with the deepest of roots in racialized and gendered injustices. This has embedded the idea that global South countries can be sacrificed because they have the less value than the richest countries in the global North. Racial injustice and its part in colonialism is at the core of the global economic system. And debt has been used by colonial powers as a tool with which to strip the countries of Asia, Africa, and the Americas of valuable resources and wealth. We have no more time to lose. We must cancel unjust colonial global South debt. We must pay back what's owed to countries in the global South. And we must continue this fight for climate justice. A justice which rids us of colonialism, imperialism, and takes us to a fairer tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tyrone. Okay, we've got one more visualization of the debt here. So in this sack, this one sack is worth $211 billion. This is the annual amount that the global South is forced to pay back in debt repayments to global North creditors. And next to that, we're going to place 65 sacks, 65 packets of $211 billion, adding up to $7.9 trillion. This is the climate debt owed to the global South. One estimate. And that number that Tyrone just brought up, that 1 trillion that the UK might own, sounds like a huge amount of money. But at the moment, every year, rich nations spend $1.1 trillion subsidizing fossil fuels. So when they want that money, when it's linked to this economy of extraction, they can find that money. But when it's about justice, when it's about fairness, when it's about doing what's right, suddenly that money disappears. And we're gaslit with rhetoric that it's suddenly going to be taken from our pockets, from working people's pockets. But that's not where it comes from. Because the cancellation of a debt is removing money from the savings accounts of the very, very rich and returning that money to the wages and the people who have to work every single day to create that wealth that is consumed here in unnecessary products. So we're going to bring on our final speaker, Taran Gidwani.
Thank you so much. I'm speaking here on behalf of South Asia Solidarity Group. Okay. I'll wait till we get the whole pile and then...
We're just trying to show the difference here between this small amount of debt, $211 billion only, and hopefully we'll get all 65 sacks here, which represent the global North debt. And I think we can see that it is pathetic that we don't cancel this in the global North. What are we thinking? Look at the immense debt owed by the global North in comparison to this trivial amount. And let us remember that this trivial amount of debt is causing endless pain. People that are paying this amount of debt are unable to properly fund services like health and education. And yet, look at all this, nearly up to 65. Global North debt, hard to actually keep it up. Have we got it all now? Any more left? Oh, are there any more? No? Nearly. Oh. All right. Woo! There we go. to everybody that this injustice is staggering and ridiculous, and it has gone on long enough. I personally do not want to say that I colluded with this ridiculous situation. I think there are enough people in the UK that will stand up and say, we do not collude with this nonsense. Passing over to our speaker, next speaker.
Thank you, Katie. That small pile there, I think sometimes we, on the left, when we speak numbers and debt, we obscure the lives of people who are in pain because of the unjust debt system in the world. Sri Lanka, you know, for instance, is in the middle of complete economic devastation. What this means is people losing their jobs, people switching from using stoves to using wood to cook their food, people unable to buy medicines for the elderly. That economic pain and that pain in the lives of ordinary people, I think, characterizes the moral ugliness behind the unjust debt system that the global north has created. Sri Lanka and Zambia spent 40% of their GDP on debt repayments. And this is after the G20 common framework of debt restructuring. For us, these are numbers, but these are bullying tactics on the lives of people in the global south to repay debt that is owed to banking institutions like this in the global north and to private creditors. Just this morning, I got news from someone in the family who were hospitalized back home in India. The person who was hospitalized had a small business loan. The bankers, being who they are, showed up at the hospital to collect the debt. We're engaging with the doctors and with this person who was sick in negotiations. To me, that seemed like the most morally repugnant scene, that here you have someone battling an illness in a hospital who were there in the middle of a medical emergency, and the banker shows up to collect their dues. But that scene is what is playing out in the global economic system today. It is just as morally repugnant as that. Countries in the global south were coerced into opening their markets, coerced into accepting credit from banking institutions around the world. And just as the pandemic hit, just as interest rates began to rise and rise, just when they needed that money the most to get people out of the pandemic, while rich countries had gigantically increased their fiscal spending, the poor countries who needed this money the most were bullied into using that money away from social spending and into repaying debts. Therefore, like every speaker said before me, Heidi is a great inspiration. She's been tirelessly a voice for low and middle income countries. Heidi said 54 countries are currently in debt distress, but that number hides many, many other countries who are not currently categorized as being in debt distress because they are repaying their loans on time, but they're repaying it by taking money away from the ordinary lives of people. So we mustn't forget that this is not just a number, it's people's dreams, their health, their ability to get a job, which is under threat from this unjust system, and therefore we demand an immediate cancellation of the debt in the global south. Thank you.
Thanks, Taryn. Cancel the debt! Cancel the debt! Cancel the debt! We have one more speaker, Sandra Dixon. Today is a day of indigenous resistance, and so Sandra is going to speak to us about that.
Thank you very much for organizing this event. The exploitation that all the communities around the world has to have from banks like this and multinational companies is a shame, and it should be cancelled the debt and should be cancelled the exploitation they have been doing over our communities and our population. Today, I'm a Latin American person, and today is the day of it's 12 October, when we have nothing to celebrate. It's a day of the resistance of the indigenous and the oppressed people, because the oppression continues. 12 October in 1492 was the beginning of the colonization through the invasion of our native lands, plundering our natural resources and exploiting the labor of our ancestors. We were occupied. The races of white supremacy was institutionalized through the entire European colony. Policies of humanity exploitation and crimes against our original people and those brought by force from Africa as slaves caused the largest genocide and ethnocide recorded in our history, resulting in the death of approximately 56 million people of the indigenous population. As Latin American people, we are commemorating today, we are going to resistance in Trafalgar Square at 5 p.m. And we are saying again that we are still resisting, our communities are still resisting. This invitation is from the platform 12 October, but so many other organizations and political parties who are fighting against this. Thank you very much. And definitely cancel the debt! Cancel the debt! Cancel the debt!
Thank you so much, Sandra. We're coming to an end of the demonstration today, but it's not an end of the fight. I just want to draw some of those points together because this is so right. Don't be gaslit when they say, who owes who? Well, they owe this money. It's a financial amount of money. The fact that that debt has had to be asked for is wrong. The fact that it's asked for it's a historic fact. It goes back to colonialism. It goes back to the way in which those lands have been taken by force. Today, farmers in the global south often have to go to a bank for a loan to buy seed, and they have to take a contract from Monsanto to say that we're going to use this land in a certain way and we're going to use this seed and this pesticide, because only that is going to guarantee them the return on the money on the loan that they get from the bank. It's all linked together. So they don't have to use the land in a certain way that we know is financially more profitable for the company that owns the seeds, but much less diverse, much less calorie profitable. Many fewer people can't live on these lands. It feeds monocultures, it destroys biodiversity, and it's driving the climate and ecological collapse. And that is linked to the national debt. It goes all the way down and all the way back up to this building here and the buildings behind us. So all together, we're going to yell, cancel the debt! Cancel the debt! Cancel the debt! Thank you, everyone.
I think we'll just go to this contemporary play in a minute, but let's get one very loud. Cancel the debt.
Cancel the debt!
Thank you, everybody, for coming. And thank you for everything. Let's have a little thank you. Just a little thank you.
So this has been amazing with all the speakers. It really shows the intersectionality of the issue. It's not just an issue of debt itself, it's also its intersections with climate justice, with climate change, with people's livelihoods. So when we're talking about these figures, it's really excellent to see this visualization, but it's not just numbers, it's also people's lives we're talking about. So thank you so much for watching this. There are ways to get involved. If you want to learn more, you can go to Debt for Climate website. You can join the Oily Money action that's taking place in London, and you can I'll show you a QR code in a bit. We can drop it in the link. And thank you so much for watching.